I want to start off by telling you guys a story. So, you guys see these YouTube videos, you're probably not as aware of the time and effort and the amount of thought that has to go into making these videos. And so, yesterday I felt this like burst of energy, and I'm like, I'm going to film 3 videos. And I filmed one, and it was about 18 minutes long, and I filmed another, and it was about 25 minutes long, and I filmed another one that was a little over 40 minutes long. All of the topics were things that I thought would make really great videos. One of them, actually 2 of them, were highly requested, and honestly, I was really in a good creative zone. So I was able to just hit film and speak without any having to break or any need for any edits, and it was great. And then I uploaded the first video and realized, thanks to some incredible subscribers who commented, that the actual video, the sound had tapped out at about 10 minutes. The microphone failed. Then the other video I filmed, I realized that there was no sound at all. And the final video, the 40-minute video, one that I really thought would have made you guys laugh really hard, and I really enjoyed making it, I couldn't find my charger, and so I had to close off that video, or I had to end it very abruptly long before I wanted to. And obviously this is frustrating when you have limited time and content is a part of what you do it's a part of my trauma coaching business. It's a part of my mission to really share this education with Muslims across the world. It's frustrating to have an hour and a half, over an hour and a half, I guess, of time taken from you and it not amount to anything. So my husband came home and he asked, how was my day? And I told him, I'd filmed these videos and they're really good, but my microphone stopped working. And we both looked at each other and we both said the same thing. Maybe Allah wanted me to re-record these videos and to make them better. And I paused for a moment in gratitude that I had that be the first thought that came to mind. And also, this is a good reminder of why it's really important to marry someone who shares your values, because if I didn't come up with it, my husband was the one who would have a positive effect on my thinking. And this type of thinking reflects a framework of mind called cognitive flexibility. Now you hear this, you think it's about to get scientific, stay with it, because I promise you, if you get to the end of the video and you learn about this skill and you're able to apply it, if you are depressed, you are going to be able to pull yourself out of depression. And if you're not depressed, but you're more prone to depression, you're going to be able to resist it better. What is cognitive flexibility? Cognitive flexibility is essentially the ability to come up with multiple reasons or explanations for something that has happened in your life. It's a willingness to see the world as not fixed, as not as simple as we want it to be, and to give the benefit of the doubt. And this is a really powerful framework of thinking, because it takes that powerlessness that depression often gives us, not often, always gives us, and it hands the power back to us, because we realize that there's a lot more power you have over your thinking than you want to. Now, the thing about depression, anxiety, those are symptoms, and mental illness altogether, is very often you lose or you fail to be able to control your mind to the extent that you need to. And as a result, it becomes pathological. You end up with generalized anxiety disorder, just, major depressive disorder, borderline personality disorder. So many different mental health issues can come from it. But we can train cognitive flexibility. We can learn to do it, and it's actually not that hard. And in fact, Islam weaves cognitive flexibility throughout the religion. So let's talk about that, inshallah. If you see me looking over here, it's because my notes are here. So let's talk about depression. Now, depression in and of itself is a symptom. When I say depression, it doesn't mean that you have a mental disorder. Some people are depressed for a day, and that's it. 24 hours of depression is not going to constitute a mental illness. This is why you have to be really careful. People who speak about depression, sometimes they don't realize it's a symptom and not a mental illness. But depression going long enough very much does constitute a mental illness. And the reason why is because it causes it impacts your function, your ability to function on a daily basis so strongly that we now have to classify it as something that's wrong so that we can actually solve it. With that being said, there's some theories around depression that we need to understand. And the first theory, the way people used to think about depression, and I'm sure some of you guys have heard about this, but this is an older theory of depression, is that depression is just a result of chemical imbalances in your brain, right? You might have heard that. It's just a chemical imbalance in your brain. And that theory allowed us to empathize much more with people who have depression or experience depression, and helped us to understand that, you know, it's not always necessarily your fault that you have depression. And while some of that is true, the one thing we learned is actually that chemical imbalance theory has been debunked with more recent research, meaning depression is not a chemical imbalance that just suddenly happens in your brain and that's why people are depressed. It's actually a lot more complex than that. And the complexity is what allows us to think about so many different ways to address depression, and allows us to also give you guys the tools to do so much more for yourselves, to pull yourselves out of depression. Here's the thing. Is there a chemical basis for depression? Absolutely. Serotonin and dopamine are both neurotransmitters in our brain. They're chemicals in our brain. Dopamine is our motivation chemical and also our excitement chemical. When you get a dopamine hit, it's that really good feeling that you get when you first bite into that burger, or the first time you watch something and you kind of light up. That's dopamine. Serotonin is the main neurotransmitter implicated in depression, and serotonin has a huge impact on things like sleep, our happiness, it's a part of connecting with people. It's a really important neurotransmitter, and so both of those neurotransmitters drop, and a lot more things happen biologically that we won't talk about because it's not the point of the video. But both of those drop. Yet they don't just drop accidentally. They don't just drop all of a sudden. They drop as a result of other things. Our brain and body are constantly in contact with the environment. Our brain allows us to perceive our environment and the stimuli in our environment through our senses, being able to see, hear, feel, touch, smell, all those things. And then it takes that and interprets the data that it receives, and then it makes meaning of it. And that impacts our way of thinking and the principles that we live life by, and so on and so forth. We now understand that depression is multifactorial, meaning lots of things affect depression. And in fact, majority of the things that affect, or the factors that affect depression, are actually environmental, meaning majority are in our control. Now, that doesn't mean that someone who's depressed, all of a sudden we throw it in your face and we say that it's your fault. It's not that. Sometimes it just gets to a point where things are just overwhelming and your brain is responding the only way that it knows how. But it's to say that there's a lot that we can do to help get us out of that time. For example, environmentally, what can affect your levels of depression? The parents that you have and the way they raised you. The upbringing that you have has a huge implication on your mental well-being altogether, not just in terms of cognitive flexibility, but in every way, shape, and form. The foods that you eat, the amount of exercise that you get, the toxins in your environment, the toxins in the air that you breathe. There's so much that affects depression. Let's talk about the thinking part, or our worldview and how that affects depression. If cognitive flexibility is the ability to come up with multiple reasons for something happening, then it means it's something we can develop and we can learn and we can train. And we can get it to a point where we default to cognitive flexibility when something happens in our life. And by doing that, we're building our mental resilience and our spiritual resilience, because believe it or not, Islam helps us to become better at cognitive flexibility. There's something called learned helplessness. You might have, if you ever took a psychology class, you might be familiar with this concept. But learned helplessness is essentially if we condition ourselves to, if we're in a situation where we experience a negative outcome after something, eventually we will condition ourselves to not even react or get ourselves out of that situation. This is something I see very often in trauma. It's actually a very common part of trauma. But learned helplessness, the big part about it is the first part. It's learned, Meaning if we can learn something, we can unlearn something. If the conditioning causes us to become helpless, we can then condition ourselves in a different way, or we can do something called extinction, which gets rid of conditioning. So it's no longer that every time someone, every time someone raises their voice at you at home, that you automatically feel horrible and angry and, end up in this mentally unhealthy spiral to that then takes you on this, oh my God, my life is horrible and I'm never going to be able to get out of this and I hate living in this home and whatever it might be. You're able to process it differently. You're able to do it differently. You can change your brain. Now, if you don't know about changing your brain, neuroplasticity, it's our brain's incredible ability to change itself, to change its shape, its function, to build new neural connections. I made an entire video about that. You can go to my channel after you watch this video and look, and I literally teach you step by step how to change your brain in the context of anxiety and depression. Learned helplessness doesn't have to be your default anymore. You can change it. And so let's give some examples. Let's start off by looking at some Islamic examples of cognitive flexibility. There's a beautiful hadith from the Prophet ﷺ, and it goes along the lines of this. Strange is the affair of the believer, for everything is good for him, and that is not the case except for a believer. If something good happens, they are grateful, and it is good for them. And if they are struck by difficulty, they are patient, and it is good for them, and that is not the case except for the believer. This is cognitive flexibility. It's easy to be grateful and to be happy when all things around you are okay. It is hard to be cognitively flexible when you're struck by a hardship, when you get sick, or the opportunity you were hoping for gets taken away, or the person you thought you were going to marry no longer is interested, or you are in a divorce, or you find yourself in a really toxic family system. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to build that cognitive flexibility. Patience is not just bearing out. Patience is also looking at what are the silver linings in the situation. And so when your brain can default to that, then it doesn't have space to start taking you and dragging you into the negative part of your brain. That part of your brain that makes you feel like you have nothing that you can do to change the situation. And it allows you to hyper focus on the aspects of your environment that you can do something about. So when you're in hardship, then you can think about if you're in a situation, for example, where the person you want to marry no longer is interested. Instead of sitting there and thinking, no one is going to love me, and this just proves that no one wants me, and I'm never going to get married, or I'm never going to be a good wife or a good husband, whatever it might be, you can take that as an opportunity to reflect on, okay, what did this situation teach me? Had I engaged in things that were haram and realized that Allah might have taken the barakah out of the relationship because of that? Are there things that this exposed to me, like I am not the best at communication, or I actually don't understand what it means to be a good Muslim husband or wife, and now I'm going to go and do the education around that? Did it show to me that maybe there are some wounds or some patterns from my parents' marriage that I don't like, that I started replicating? And you do the work, and that's cognitive flexibility, because it allows you to pick yourself up and to continue despite the difficulty of what occurred. Another example is that cognitive flexibility can look like being grateful, recognizing that even in the midst of difficulty in your life, there are things that you can express gratitude. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us this, that even, we could never enumerate the blessings He gives us. And cognitive flexibility in this case looks like actually a draw that many of us make when we are waking up from sleep. Alhamdulillah alladhi ahyani ba'd mamati. All praise due to the one who gave me life after my death. Meaning, we understand as Muslims that when you go to sleep, Allah takes our soul, and in the morning He decides to give it back, to return it, right? And so subhanallah, we are starting off our day in hamd, which is a type of gratitude. It's a kind of a type of gratitude, and that cognitively primes you for the rest of your day, because at the very least, what it's reminding you is that this could have been your last night on earth, and Allah gave you that soul back, give you your soul back to allow you to live another day. And that allows us to be cognitively flexible. It's the time when someone ignores our message, And instead of getting so angry, why aren't they ignoring my message? Why aren't they texting back? You come up with multiple reasons. There's a strategy called the 6-pack strategy. It's a very common one used in therapy. It's one I even teach my clients, which is let's think of 6 reasons why something might have happened the way it happened. They didn't text you back. Let's think of 6 reasons why. Number 1, they could have been ignoring you. 100%. They could just be ignoring you. They don't want to talk to you. Number 2, their phone could be dead. Number 3, they could be in the middle of a meeting and they can't respond to their text message. Number 4, they could be helping or doing a chore at home. Number 5 is that they could be just having a really bad day and not wanting to talk to anyone. Number 6 is they saw it and then they completely forgot to call you back. To text you back. Those are 6 other reasons. Lots of reasons to not get angry. So instead of you, again, spiraling into anger, you pull yourself back and you're like, yeah, maybe they're just not having a good day. Maybe they're just busy. Do you see how being able to think that way, that cognitive flexibility, can completely eradicate things? The thing about depression is the longer it goes on, the harder it is to get those healthy neurotransmitter levels back to a point where you're no longer depressed. And there's a reason why with depression specifically, cognitive behavioral therapy works just as well or even better than medication. And one thing that therapy or these techniques that you learn in therapy do that medication don't do is that they outlast drug tolerance. At a certain point, if let's say you're on a medication, an antidepressant, most commonly it's an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. This is a medication that basically tries to hold onto serotonin for as long as it can so that you get that serotonin, the effective serotonin, which in depression, serotonin is lower. So it counters that. But our body is too smart. And when it realizes that it's having that higher level of serotonin, it actually stops producing its own serotonin. And so what do you have to do? You have to raise the concentration of the drug in the system to overcome that effect that your body has. That doesn't happen with therapeutic techniques. That's not to say that if you're on medication, you need to get off of medication or that you should never go on medication. I prescribe medication. I've been on medication. If you need it and you're at that low point where it's going to give you that boost for a few months or however long it might be, you speak to a medical provider about that. And don't feel any shame around it. Depression is hard. No one's going to take that away. But also make sure you're doing the cognitive flexibility work and make sure you're putting in the time, because every time we practice cognitive flexibility, our brain rewires for that to become the automatic response. And the more we do it, as a result, our dopamine starts to rise and our serotonin starts to rise and the body starts to produce those neurotransmitters that it wasn't producing at the level that it needed before. And just like that, you've rid yourself of depression. And the powerful thing is that if you're someone who's more prone to depression, because we know this, there are some people that are just more genetically prone to the experience of depression, then you have this resilience. You have things that are going to help you prevent it. You're going to lower the likelihood. You're going to raise the threshold of stress that's needed to get you depressed. You can handle more. You can expand your window of tolerance. Window of tolerance is something I've spoken about in another video. Point being, you guys, cognitive flexibility is super important. Practicing it and being willing to go through all of these different reasons. My life sucks. Does it really suck? Let's think about all the ways that it doesn't suck. Let's practice cognitive flexibility. Look at all the good that you have in your life. This is not to dismiss or invalidate your experience. We should validate it. Yes, things are hard, but we shouldn't allow it to become the only thing that we see or the only aspect of our identity that is worthy of acknowledging. Because we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in fact, even Allah's names help us to practice cognitive flexibility, because if you look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names, it's almost like Allah is telling us all of these attributes that I have. Look how beautiful and positive and powerful so many of them are. How could we live in a life where we believe that everything is doomed and your life is horrible and God could never love me, when Allah tells you all these things about him, that he's the most merciful, he's the most loving, he's the most forgiving, he is the protector, he's the provider, that he is the sustainer, that he is the turner of hearts. Cognitive flexibility. It's so easy, so powerful, And I hope that this video is helpful to anyone who's struggling with depression to learn that there is a skill that you can learn that can change it all. Assalamu alaikum. If you like this video, subscribe, like it, and leave a comment below. And I'll see you in the next one.